everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and yammer about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today, we're continuing our series of brief introductions to other lost lands that are going to come up in our continuing series on Atlantis by tackling the continent of Mu. Yeah, Mu. I don't make these names up, folks. I just bring them to you. Where am I bringing Mu from, though, you ask? Because while Atlantis and Hyperborea come to us from ancient Greek stories, and Lemuria comes to us via an old scientific theory, Mu is actually wrapped up in a semi-mystical movement called Mayanism, which is a set of mystical beliefs focused on the Mayan civilization of Central America. I should note that the Mayan people are not extinct. They are still very much alive and still live in Guatemala and Mexico and in that general region. Please feel free to look them up if you'd like to know more. Now, back to Mayanism, the beliefs that matter the most to this video are the ones that were popular in the 1800s, which focused a lot on linking the ancient Mayans to Atlantis and Egypt, with rather intense debate over which of those three came first. Although, before I jump into that, we're going to go even further back to the 1500s when Mexico and Central America were first being colonized by Spain, to a fanatical Spanish churchman and his translation of the written Mayan language. Diego de Lando was a Spanish Franciscan priest who arrived in the Yucatan in 1549 and was convinced almost from day one that the Yucatan was home to a Mayan underground society of demon worshippers seeking to undermine the Catholic Church. He would declare repeatedly that indigenous Mayan priests who were jealous of losing their privileged position in society were leading illegal cults performing human sacrifices, witchcraft, and idol worship to subvert and undermine the Spanish campaign of not really willing conversions, if we're going to be entirely honest here. There was a lot of forced conversion and shooting people going on. Yeah. Now, while we do have some evidence of syncretic rituals being performed, um, actually, I should explain that. Syncretic rituals and beliefs are when you mix two religious traditions together into a set of hybrid beliefs and practices. Uh, Imagine if you cook ideas and beliefs from Christianity and threw them into a blender with a bunch of Buddhist stuff and started, mixing and matching like that. That would be a syncretic belief. Um, this tends to be very common in societies that have run into a culture that they have perceived as being more advanced, or cultures that are the victims of imperialism and colonialism. So you would see a lot of this among the Native Americans, like the Mayans. Now, among the Mayans, some of the rituals that we know actually took place were rather brutal, with people being crucified, for example. But on the other hand, at least one of the people that Delanda claimed was a victim of human sacrifice turned out to be alive years after his supposed death. Yeah. So whether or not there was an underground society or any of this stuff going on in any widespread format is disputed, to put it mildly. Basically, if you look at his claims, you're going to have to add giant grains of salt. And to be blunt, Delanda was the living embodiment of this C.S. Lewis quote that I'm fond of. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it out for you here. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. A robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His greed may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. I'm going to be honest, folks, it terrifies me that this is still relevant. It was relevant when he said it, and I'm sadly come to the belief that this quote will be relevant when everyone listening to this is dust and your grandchildren are old. But back to Mu. Now, the Spanish crown had granted indigenous peoples like the Mayans immunity from the Inquisition under the idea that the Mayans wouldn't have a full understanding of the faith and would need time to transition to it. That there was an idea that they needed a period to fully grasp what the Spanish considered to be correct behavior and beliefs. Therefore, what the Spanish crown thought was needed was a period of tolerance and patience. De Landa was having none of that and called forth an inquisition engaging in public torture and executions, as well as destroying Mayan cultural artifacts and burning every written record he could get a hold of. It was his belief that by wiping out Mayan culture and history, he would force them to embrace Christianity out of a sheer lack of options. Now, I am a practicing Christian, and this is disgusting. It's a crime against humanity, and even his own contemporaries found him to be brutal and heavy handed. He was removed in 1566 and condemned by the Council of the Indies. Sadly, he had fans who got him absolved in 1569 and put back in power in 1571 when the guy who was the Bishop of Mexico at the time died and was no longer able to block it. While he was out of power, though, he compiled his notes and created the De Landa alphabet as part of a defense against the condemnations coming at him. The De Landa alphabet was a translation of Mayan to Spanish based on the idea of written Mayan being an alphabetical language. This is that each written character is a single sound, like English or French, so on and so forth. He did this by interviewing Mayans and basically demanding that they tell him which written characters was linked to which letter. Now, it's been suggested that these people who were basically thrown and locked into a room with a man who had, publicly tortured and murdered so many Mayans were terrified out of their minds, didn't fully understand the question, and just guessed to what he was asking to make him stop, which I'm going to be honest here, guys, is perfectly reasonable given their circumstances. Well, the De Landa alphabet was forgotten soon after Diego's death in 1579, but was rediscovered by the French scholar Brazier de Bourbow. De Bourbow was a believer in Atlantis, and he believed the Mayan word Mu was the Mayan name for Atlantis. His ideas were widely rejected even in the 1860s when he first published them. The De Landa alphabet itself, though, wouldn't be discredited until the 1950s when the Ukrainian-born Soviet scholar Yuri Konovzarved, and I apologize to anybody listening for my pronunciation there, made the breakthrough that Mayan script was actually more like Egyptian or Chinese writing, with some characters being entire ideas or words instead of single sounds. I'll be honest, this whole thing, the translation of the Mayan language, I mean, is fascinating in of itself, but it's gonna have to wait until we do a deeper dive into Mu and the related topics thereof. All that said, it was the British American archaeologist Augustus Le Plongeon and his wife Alice Dixon Le Plongeon who advanced the idea of Mu the most. Now, the Le Plongeons did do actual credible and in some cases critical work that advanced our understanding of pre-Columbian cultures, which is what makes this a bit frustrating. They were very skilled photographers and took some of the first photos of Mayan cities, and they developed a systematic and methodical method for creating 3D visual recordings using photographs of Mayan ruins. They did this in the late 1800s when photography was still in a really early phase. They also claim, however, to use the Delanda alphabet to translate one of the few Mayan codexes to survive Diego and his priestess purge, the Plovu, which is a text that recounts the mythology and history of the Quiche people, a Mayan ethnic group. And I'm going to apologize for my pronunciation of that as well, because I could not find a pronunciation guide for that people. So if anyone from that group hears me and I butchered your name, I am really sorry. Let's get back to our crazy Americans, though, right? So they claimed that the Mayans were older than Atlantis or Egypt, and that Central America, or the Yucatan, I should say, was the original cradle of civilization, which, due to modern dating, we know that Mayan civilization is just not that old. It's not. Sorry. They claimed that their translation told the epic tale of Queen Moo. In this case, it's actually spelled Moo, so I mean, I'm doing what I can here. Queen Moo had a lover named Prince Ko, but they were betrayed by another prince named Ak, and that's AAC. So, again, what can I do here? Who killed Prince Ko in a jealous rage. And just because my life is not full enough, there's some Game of Thrones spice here. Ko and Ak were also Queen Moo's brothers. Mr. Martin, I don't know where you found your time machine. I don't know why you just go back in time to insert this stuff, but it's wrong, Mr. Martin, and you need to stop. You need to stop, sir. Okay? All right. Sorry, guys. Queen Moo fled to Atlantis, but by the time she got there, it was already underwater. So she kept right on running until she found a nice faraway land with a great river and founded Egypt. Our archaeologists would then claim that Queen Mu was the inspiration of the myth of Isis in Egyptian mythology, and that she built the Sphinx in Prince Ko's memory. They went even further by declaring themselves to be the reincarnation of Queen Mu and Prince Ko, because of course they did! You know, why is it no one ever comes out and says they're the reincarnation of a goat herder? Or, a farmer, or even a blacksmith, or just some dude who lived a nice quiet life up in the foothills, raising lotus weed or something. I don't know. It, Everyone who says they're the reincarnation of somebody, it's always like some big queen or king or mythical hero or generals. Has anyone else noticed that? Is it just me? It can't just be me. These, okay, I'm calling them ideas because they're simply not scientific theories. They're just not. They're ideas. These ideas were not widely accepted by society or by the scientific community because even then it was widely understood that Mayan civilization simply was not as old as Egyptian civilization. But Augustus and Alice would defend these ideas to their deaths. Alice even wrote a book, an epic poem, and a play telling the tragic story in detail. And I'm going to be honest with you, if anyone ever puts on this play and they're able to do a straight face, serious retelling of this, every one of those actors will deserve an award. Because imagine having to run into a room in front of a crowded room full of people with your family and friends watching and having to scream at the top of your voice something like, "Oh, great Queen Moo, tragedy is upon us," and keep a straight face. That, that will be acting, okay? And I'm not changing my mind on this. Back to Moo. Things I have to say on YouTube. Uh, Augustus would pass away in 1908, and Alice would pass away in 1910. Again, both vigorously defending their beliefs, including the fact that they were reincarnations of Queen Mu and Prince Ko. right until the very end of their lives. Now, when she passed away, Alice would will her and her husband's written research materials and papers to a close friend, a gentleman by the name of James Churchward, who some of you likely remember from last week. James Churchward would publish a series of books in the 1920s and 30s, using in part Alice and Augustus's research, and I use the term research loosely here. In it, he detailed the advanced civilization of Mu, wrapping it up with Lemurian Atlantis, claiming that all of them were stories about the same continent, which is clever branding if nothing else. He, however, would move this continent to the Pacific, maybe because it was the only ocean that didn't have someone claiming there was a sunken continent in it at the time. He declared Mu to be this vast land that, of course, held millions of people living in a society that was even more advanced than the industrial societies of the early 20th century. This civilization he dubbed the Nakul, and it was, of course, founded and led by white people, because can't let the Pacific Islanders be in charge of a civilization in their own damn ocean, right? No. Now, he claimed that the continent was formed by violent volcanic upheavals, and as a consequence of that, the vast continent that stretched from Hawaii to nearly New Zealand was honeycombed with large underground chambers full of explosive gas. A series of earthquakes would rupture these chambers, causing a massive explosion that destroyed the whole continent overnight and let the waters of the Pacific in to submerge it forever. He would declare that the monumental architecture of places like Easter Island and New Zealand were not the works of the natives, but rather the remains of Mu monuments, and that the Pacific Islander peoples weren't even the descendants of Mu, but rather cannibal barbarians who had swarmed the wreckage and forced out the true survivors. Just in case there's not enough racism in this for you, he would also go on to claim that India, Babylon, Persia, Egypt, and of course the Mayans were just the decayed, degenerative remains of this mighty Muian empire. And if I sound really dumb with this, it's because I know what this bit of racism is leading us towards, and I'm really just frustrated and done with this kind of crap. This idea that it has to be white people who have done all this stuff is just so incredibly wrong-headed, and I'm done with it. And I hope you are too. Okay, so that's a bit of a downer note. I apologize, but I think this gives you a good basic introduction to Mu, and that should be everything we need to head into the 20th century. May God have mercy on our souls. That said, I hope you found this informative, or at least entertaining. If so, please leave a like, comment, or even subscribe. All of those really help me in my struggle against the Dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like to support this channel even further, consider joining the ranks of my ever-wise patrons, who you can vote on content like this for as little as $1 a month. Speaking of which, special thanks to Big Steve, my biggest supporter. As always, man, I appreciate it. Next week, we do return to Atlantis by looking at the mystical movements that had taken over the discussion in the earliest 20th century. And after that, Nazis. The damn Nazis. We're gonna talk about Nazis. I hope you join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.